In the last few sessions of this series of video lecture, I have discussed the qualitative tests such as direct smear, sedimentation, and floatation. The modified McMaster test has also been discussed under the qualitative test. In this lesson, I'm going to discuss fecal culture. Fecal culture is mostly used in diagnostic parasitology as well as for research purpose. Parasitic infection or infestation are diagnosed based on the identification of eggs of parasites using routine fecal test. There are certain groups of parasites whose eggs cannot be distinguished based on their morphological features rather than depending on the identification of the larval stages. The principle of this test is fecal sample containing eggs in it are allowed to incubate at room temperature or at certain temperature for several days to hatch out the eggs to the larval stages. Then larvae, mostly third stage larvae, are isolated using the Behrman techniques or test. Specific parasitism are detected by the morphological features of the larvae. However, the isolated desired larvae can be used for different types of research such as enthelmintic resistance test, molecular study, etc. To perform the fecal culture, first take 20 to 30 grams of freshly collected sample in a jar. Feces must be free of contamination by the free-living larvae from soil or plants. Break up the feces sample if required. If it is dry, moisten it by slightly adding water. Feces should not so wet because larvae do not survive well in very wet fecal materials. If feces are soft or liquid, add peat moss or sterilized charcoal to create a more suitable consistency. It is also noted that sheep and goats' feces can be cultured without breaking them up. Then, keep the jar on a shelf away from direct sunlight and allow it to incubate at room temperature for 10 to 12 days or 27 degrees centigrade for 7 days. Daily stirring of the culture will prevent the growth of mold and will circulate the oxygen for the development of the larvae. If sample begin to dry out, just add water. The moisture of the sample should be maintained by adding water routinely. Following the culture period, harvest the larvae using the Behrman test or Behrman apparatus techniques. Thanks for watching this video lecture. Follow my next lesson on isolation of larvae through Behrman apparatus techniques or Behrman test.